All right, everyone, welcome to the June 20th service event of the North Texas Church of Freethought. Last week we discussed the subject of entropy because it had come up in May in an after discussion that we don't post on YouTube. So see, there are benefits to participating in the live Zoom sessions that you don't get on YouTube. This week we're going to talk about the subject of Boltzmann brains because that came up last week in the after discussion. I'm pretty sure Leonard was the one who mentioned it. And he's not here, but he can watch it later on YouTube. So this is one more of many ways that we're different from the traditional churches that are fixated on, chanting and grilled cheese sandwiches that look like they're holy icons, but never Boltzmann brains. More in a few moments. If you're watching this on YouTube after the live event, please comment, like us, subscribe, and spread the word. Check out our other videos, many from our in-person services, and check out our website. It's the lower right box there. There's a great deal of material on our website from our 27 years of existence. There's even more that we haven't even posted yet. There is on every page of our website a place to sign up at the bottom to get our notices so that you can join us on our Zoom sessions, or if you're in the DFW area, attend the limited in-person events that we've started up again. We're also on meetup.com, and you can drop us an email through our website as well. Of course, we only recommend the in-person events if you've gotten the COVID-19 immunization. We'll be having one of those in 2 weeks because it'll be the first Sunday of July. I think we're going to have that even though it's kind of the holiday weekend. Well, we are a very different sort of church than what is familiar to most people. We say that religion is just whatever you think about the big questions of the human condition, that it's not some set of doctrines and rituals. We say that it's all well and good, praiseworthy even, to have your own ideas about what human existence and your personal experiences, what they mean. We say that it's not good at all to accept someone else's unsubstantiated, I got it from God claims, even if a lot of other people do accept it, and even if the claims are in a so-called holy book from the Bronze Age. As for church, we say that a church is just people who share core ideas, or at least a common approach about what the quest for understanding and therefore human happiness is all about. We ask, haven't the purveyors of supernaturalism had more than enough time and opportunity to do something good with religion and church? And how well have they succeeded? Clearly, for the most part, they have totally screwed it up. Their efforts have gotten in the way of scientific and social progress. They have hurt, injured, and continued to oppress a lot of people, and they have left us with a legacy of hatred, misunderstanding, fear, willful ignorance, and glorified gullibility. We say enough. It is time, well past time in fact, that religion and church be started over again, or as it is said today, that they be reinvented, reimagined, and rebooted. Of course, religion is not and perhaps can never be science. Indeed, religion may be defined as, we at the North Texas Church of Freethought have so defined it, as the enterprise of making sense of everything that science cannot make sense of. Even if it were scientifically established that there were super powerful extraterrestrials that created the universe and undertook to lord it over us, and at the moment of our death snatched our consciousness to judge us by their standards and so on, religion would still not be science. We can nevertheless still look to science as a guide to making sense of the human predicament. That is, religion can and should be put on a foundation of honest curiosity, inquiry, openness, doubt, humility, and a willingness to give up any idea for a better one, as well as a determination not to allow our baser instincts to derail the prospect and promise of all that we stand to gain from this enterprise. Most of all, it must be kept in mind that coming to grips with ultimate meaning, as some have described the meaning and end of religion, you can't really put that into a book, much less equations. For it is more like learning to ride a bike than learning geography or quantum mechanics. You can learn from others, but you can only really learn it for yourself by doing it. That's what our church and our vision of Freethought are about. Real religion is making sense of our humanity and of what and who we are, stripped of supernatural nonsense. No one can do it for you. It is a solitary and sometimes lonely task, but there is a lot that we can do together. It begins not with faith, but with doubt, and it only ends when you do. The goal is not to arrive, but to travel hopefully. So, what are Boltzmann brains? Ludwig Boltzmann was the Austrian physicist and philosopher who made major contributions to the science of thermodynamics, which we talked about previously. That's the study of heat, work, energy, and their transformations. That was touched off by the invention of the first practical steam engines around the beginning of the 18th century. By the time of Boltzmann in the 19th century, much progress had been made to the point where Boltzmann could develop the discipline of what is now called statistical mechanics. It was Boltzmann who coined the term entropy that we talked about last week. As you remember, we talked about the fact that this was the first time that the arrow of time, quote unquote, you'll see that phrase, came up in physics, and that this arises from the fact that systems evolve in the direction of thermal equilibrium, or as Boltzmann expressed it, heat never passes from a colder body to a warmer one. And yet, systems in thermal equilibrium randomly explore all possible permutations of the positions and motions of their constituents. Typically, the example is gas molecules in a box. Mostly, these are large numbers of microstates for which the overall macro state is the same. But these systems can also, very rarely, assume arrangements of low entropy. You see the other end of the curve there. Arrangements of low entropy are highly ordered arrangements given enough time. And one can actually calculate the probability of it happening, for example, that scrambled eggs spontaneously become unscrambled, or that dispersed particles all gather in a small part of the space enclosing them, or a small region becomes significantly hotter or colder than the rest of the system. Typically, it would take much, much longer than the current age of the universe to have any chance of seeing such things happen, but on a scale of infinity, it must happen. It was Boltzmann's suggestion, in fact, in 1896, that perhaps our universe, which clearly has been going from a very low entropy state to a higher entropy state over now billions of years, may have begun as a random fluctuation from a pre-existing state of thermal equilibrium. Few think of it today, but thoughtful people have long been preoccupied and puzzled by these things, the change and transformations that are apparent in the world. Where does it come from? Why do things change? And towards what end? Where are they heading? And why are we not already there? Heraclitus, the guy on the left there, look at that, 500 years before the current era. He famously said that everything has been, is, and will always be changing, that one cannot step twice into the same river. Parmenides lived about the same time. He, on the other hand, insisted that everything is fixed and unchanging, that what is, and what is not, cannot be, that it is only our perceptions that delude us into supposing otherwise. Hundreds of years later, but still well before any of the New Testament was ever dreamed of, Lucretius speculated about such things in his work on the nature of things. Think of how poetic this is, really, even compared to Genesis. Here's what he wrote. For in very truth, not by design did the first beginnings of things place themselves, each in their order with foreseeing mind, nor indeed did they make compact what movements each should start. But because many of them, shifting in many ways throughout the world, are harried and buffeted by blows from limitless time, by trying of movements and unions of every kind, at last they fall into such dispositions as those whereby our world of things is created and holds together. This clearly anticipates Boltzmann's speculation that our universe, which was then at his time only our galaxy was what they thought the universe was, that it may be the result of a random fluctuation from a pre-existing state of thermal equilibrium. Very similar, I think. Enter the British astronomer, physicist, and mathematician Arthur Eddington, another genius, and we mentioned many as we've had our church services. Smarter than any of the evangelists or patriarchs of the Bible. Eddington just happens to be the person who introduced that term, arrow of time, and linked it to the second law of thermodynamics. It was also he that first suggested that stars work by fusing lighter elements into heavier ones, such that we are composed of the cooled ashes of stars, because they figured out at that time that an atom of helium weighed slightly less than 4 atoms of hydrogen. which were thought to be squished together into stars to make helium, and that tiny little mass difference, Einstein's theories had just come out, and Eddington speculated that's where the energy of stars come from. So in 1931, Eddington pointed out the obvious. I've not been able to find the extended original context, but the nugget of the idea is here, that if it is possible for an entire universe, the Big Bang, to spring into existence by a random fluctuation from a state of pre-existing thermodynamic equilibrium, as Boltzmann suggested, how much more likely would it be for just a single galaxy, or a single solar system, a single Earth-like planet, a single human being, or even just a human brain to spring into existence spontaneously as a result of a random fluctuation? Of course, lots of other things could spring into existence too: an ocean, an iceberg, a 747, a celestial teapot, a goldfish, a penny, or just a single grain of sand. Universes occupied solely by those things, though, would be even more likely to happen, but no one would be around to observe them. Whereas if a single human brain popped into existence, complete with memories, perceptions, feelings, and thoughts like those of any one of us, how would we know that we weren't such a brain? Add in infinite time, and it would be overwhelmingly more likely that you are a Boltzmann brain than that you are what you think you are. In fact, if our universe lasts forever after getting to a state of maximum entropy in a heat death scenario, kind of a misnomer there, because heat death sounds like it's hot, but it's actually cold. If you got the newsletter on Saturday morning, you would have seen that there was a little graphic there showing a brain popping out in minus 453 degrees centigrade. Boltzmann brains could pop into and out of existence in the infinite future, but for the complicating factor that there won't be any atoms with which to do it, and if, as suspected, the universe continues to expand indefinitely, the likelihood of very much stuff popping into existence would be expected to continue to diminish. But we can leave that to the cosmologists. Now, you might be saying, I know I am not a Boltzmann brain, but you can't really know that. Even if you say, but a Boltzmann brain would immediately die, and that is part of the thought experiment, that it would immediately die. There's no way to know that you're not already there at the point of death, and what you think is now is just part of those memories that popped into existence with your brain. Objective time is not the same as physical time. For the same reasons, you cannot know whether you are actually a brain in a vat. That's the old brain in a vat experiment. We've talked about that before. You might also say that it is much more likely that a human brain comes about by the process of biological evolution than by its spontaneous generation out of a thermodynamic equilibrium just from a fluctuation. And that is true given the existence of the universe as we know it, but that's the very point at issue. And it definitely remains the case that it is much more likely that a tiny part of a universe, like an isolated brain, could be spontaneously generated as a fluctuation than that a whole universe could be so generated. Some have responded to the Boltzmann brain scenario as saying that's silly, stupid, and not worth considering. But this is to mistake the idea as no more than simple solipsism, the idea that you are the only thing that exists and everything else is a figment of your imagination. Solipsism is absurd, but only because while it is not beyond imagining, it is sterile. There is no possible evidence that could corroborate or refute it. Nor does solipsism give us the science that allows us, according to our imagination, solipsism would hold to get enough to eat, or avoid or cure deadly diseases, or fly around the world and even to the moon and back. The Boltzmann brain problem, on the other hand, is a logical consequence of Boltzmann's suggestion as to how the universe may have come about. 19th century British scientist Thomas Henry Huxley, he's the fellow that coined the term agnostic, he once pointed out that logical consequences are the scarecrows of fools and the beacons of wise men. What a great saying. Also, if you remember in the program in May on abductive reasoning, the process of deducing logical consequences is mainly useful because it helps us come up with ways to inductively test our guesses as to what may explain the phenomena of our experience. If the logical consequences that we deduce from an idea, Boltzmann brain in this case, suggest no means of testing the idea, or if they're clearly wrong, or absurdities that are, as they say, not even wrong, then the idea we started with is useless and probably false. So that's how we use deduction. And what is the idea that leads to Boltzmann brains? It is that the universe came about by a fluctuation in the thermodynamic equilibrium of materials out of which brains could be formed. But this is not what most cosmologists believe about how the universe may have plausibly begun. Similarly, cosmologists do not seem concerned that the ultimate fate of the universe will lead to Boltzmann brain scenarios. Interestingly, Lucretius' speculation, what I showed before here, mainly because it's so much less specific than Boltzmann's, could still be true. Something like it is almost certainly the case, which is just the idea that something has always existed and that through some random or at least undirected process, the Big Bang gave rise to the universe we see. There may be other ways to get to a low entropy state than through random fluctuations. So, for example, the second law of thermodynamics may not apply on scales exceeding or in circumstances surpassing that which applies to the observable universe that we have access to. If there is a multiverse, then maybe high entropy black holes in one reality can crush down material that then squirts out in low entropy big bangs elsewhere. So there's still a lot we have not discovered. It may be that collisions between universes generate new universes. There are lots of ideas, abductive guesses currently, that await further analysis and potential testing. String theory is another one of those. Many such ideas undoubtedly will turn out to be dead ends or flat out wrong, and that is to be expected. But while matter and energy and the universe itself may be finite, we have not yet discovered the limits of human imagination and ingenuity. And when I stated that, when I was thinking of that, this popped into my mind. This, by the way, seems not to have been said by Einstein, whose general theory of relativity actually required a finite universe, finite but unbounded. So beware, and yes, I chose this particular version of the quote deliberately in hopes that the misspelling will make it easier for you to remember not to take it as fact that Einstein ever said it. He probably never did. A pertinent feature of the Boltzmann brains business is its use by some Christian apologists to win the existence of God argument. As with abduction and entropy, though, their reliance on it is a ruse to appear scientific and scholarly. As you should be able to appreciate by now, it simply shows how little they understand the problem and its basis. Meanwhile, there are so many logically absurd consequences to Godism that it literally boggles any rational mind. But the solution to this, we are assured, are nothing but excuses like faith in God's mysterious ways. That's one of these Christian apologists, famous guy on the bottom left. That's Sean Carroll on the bottom right, who's written about the Boltzmann brains, and he's a cosmologist out, I believe, at California Institute of Technology. Very bright guy, and we've had quotes from him, and I think we showed a clip from him in the past during church services. The truth is that we don't know how the universe began, what there was before, quote unquote, before the Big Bang, or where, quote unquote, the Big Bang came from. Such questions involve the world of objective reality that we share, so they really have nothing to do with religion, as the North Texas Church of Freethought conceives of it, nor is it the job of either science or religion to answer all questions. But these subjects are enormously interesting, useful, and instructive. They put our brains to work, and they illustrate how we ought to think about problems and puzzles in our everyday lives that have little or nothing to do with science, but do have to do with making sense of the pressing challenges of our work, family, relationships, goals, values, and especially what matters to us most in our very limited and finite time in this, the only life that we know or can know of. That is, we look to our experiences, and we try to pay attention to as much of that experience as possible. Sometimes missing things along the way. Sure, we make mistakes all the time. We're generally also well served by drawing as best we can on the experience of others. We look for connections, we ask questions, and we make guesses about what it all means. We consider what the logical consequences of our guesses may be, and we think of ways to see if those can be tested. If we can run into problems, we go back to the drawing board on the assumption that something might have been wrong with our initial assessment. And if not, we go on in a hopeful effort to see how we may do better. It's not that complicated. The challenge is in the doing. But there is no winning without playing the game, nor is it a spectator sport. And this, for us, is what real religion is about. Turns out that a few things happened on June 20th. Here's our church's creed, really just our principles or guiding lights: reason, figuring things out; enjoyment, or what the economists call utility; appreciation, not taking anything for granted; and love, loving what we value and valuing what we love, for love and values are inextricably linked. This is what I wanted to show. Previous one, jumped the gun. Here's some things that happened on June 20th. 1631, the Sack of Baltimore. Not Baltimore in the U.S., Baltimore in Ireland. And guess what? The people who sacked the place were pirates from Algeria. Think about that, pirates from Algeria sailing up and sacking Ireland. In 1840, on this date, a patent was issued for the telegraph. You can guess who it was issued to. A guy by the name of Samuel Morse. Remember Morse code? I know you all learned it in school. 1863, during the Civil War, West Virginia became the 35th state. Interesting story behind that, because remember, Virginia was part of the Confederacy. West Virginia decided they wanted no part of that. And in 1944, MW18014 V2 rocket reaches outer space. That was a Nazi rocket launched from the Peenemünde research facility in Germany. It got above the limit for the Earth's atmosphere. First thing that we launched into outer space. We don't want to talk about that because the Nazis did it, but there it is. And then something very important happens tonight at 10:32 p.m. Central Daylight Time. That is the summer solstice, when the Earth's northern hemisphere is tilting maximally towards the sun, and after that the days begin growing shorter again. We've all noticed how the days have been growing longer, but then they will begin growing shorter. Here's our principles I ran through. And that it is an important mission of Freethought and Freethinkers to practice and encourage respectful discussion. We don't respect ideas necessarily, but we respect others. We should not respect, and in fact, we should always be a little doubtful about our ideas, even our own. And it is notable that we need to keep our respect for others in mind, not so much when everything they say is agreeable to us, but precisely when their views strike us as wrong and even loathsome. It's in those situations that we're really challenged. Did we really understand what they were saying correctly? And even if we did, why do they hold such views? That's the time to employ some Socratic reasoning. Excuse me, did I hear that right? And what did you mean by that? What, if anything, may cause people to doubt views like that they hold? Or at least what may encourage them to at least have respect for those who do not share them? Too often, disagreements devolve into incivility, and nothing hardens disagreement more than that. Especially as atheists, we are looked on, as most of us know and have personally experienced, looked on with suspicion and fear by most believers. If we cannot learn to be civil with our fellow freethinkers, how are we going to make any headway with the God hates fags people? As we have discussed before, of course, there are people who have left the Westboro Baptist Church, the God hates fags people. So there's hope for anyone, however unlikely it may seem. By all means, agree with others when they express views you agree with, but if we don't look kindly on those who live in echo chambers, then we should ourselves be more open to different opinions. That is really the most important diversity, and there's lots of ways to interact with civility. We can consider ideas without accepting them. Indeed, we benefit when we consider wrong ideas and figure out why and in what ways they are wrong, and sometimes what kernel of truth they may contain, or what it is about them that may appeal to otherwise well-intended people. Always, always, let us not believe too much or too strongly. It is enough to know of many things without becoming very attached to any of them. This is the way of freethinkers. Remember that we are minds, but also bodies. Let us be aware of our physical and emotional status, and as best we can, that of others. We ask not just for your moral support and participation in the discussion of the ideas important to us, but also for your financial support. And let us know what else you would like to see us do, and be prepared to help us accomplish it. In the after discussion, love to hear what other service ideas you may have. Doesn't mean I'm going to rush off and slavishly do them, but if they appeal to me too, then I may do that. Or one of you could do it. Doesn't have to be all up to me. Please visit us on Facebook and Twitter. We're not very active in those places, but they're outposts of our way of thinking and important ways for us to increase and improve the impact of free thought. 4, it is your values that are at stake. If you're truly committed to those values, if you believe they are important, remember that belief is, as the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce put it, a disposition to act. Find fault with others who do not act in support of the values they say they hold. Let us act in support of our values. Together, we can do more. We are lucky to have each other and this church, so let us make the most of it. As Gandhi put it, be the future you wish to see. Thank you and good morning. And with that, for those of us in today's video conference, we'll go on to discussion. We'll look forward to hearing what you all think about today's subject and any other subject that may be on your mind. Thanks again. Bye-bye.